Hello, everybody. My name is DeForest Soaries. My friends call me Buster, and my enemies call me Buster, too. I'm happy to be in Chicago. Let's thank the Ricketts family, the Kemp Foundation, all of those that invited us to be here today. Come on, let's thank them for doing it. And give yourself a round of applause for being here to talk about solutions to the nation's problems. I am honored to spend some time with my friend. He is a great leader. He is a great congressman. He is a passionate husband. He's a dedicated father. He sleeps on the couch in his office, and he goes home every week to Wisconsin. Let's welcome the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Come on, Congressman Paul Ryan.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
That's neat. Hey, folks. How you doing? Hey, Joanne. Nice to see you.
Paul, bring us up to date on things that are important to you that we don't read about or hear about in the news.
Well, that's just about everything. That's important. So what I'll get into, Buster, is we have been working on an opportunity agenda, a poverty agenda, for quite some time in Congress. And it hasn't gotten a great deal of attention, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean to say it hasn't gotten done. So based upon a lot of the travels that we have had together, right, we came to the realization that we need to get more resources into communities and more resources into ideas and very effective, skilled poverty fighters. And we need to sort of flood the zone, not with just government, and government has a very important role to play, but with private capital and with ideas to revitalize communities and save souls. So to that end, a group of us, in particular, Tim Scott, a senator from South Carolina, he hosted this forum a couple years ago in Columbia, South Carolina, and our Congressman who retired, Pat Tiberi, sort of took over when I left the Ways and Means Committee, this issue. When I was Jack Kemp's staff guy, we worked on this idea called enterprise zones back in those days. Right. That was 25 years ago when we were talking about enterprise zones. We now have it in law, and we call them opportunity zones. That's something that we put in our tax bill, which is one of our solutions to getting a lot of private capital into poor and distressed communities to revitalize. And what empowerment opportunity zones do from a tax perspective, I don't want to get too wonky on it, is you can sell an asset and take the proceeds of that, don't pay taxes on that sale, and invest it into an opportunity zone. What is an opportunity zone? It is 25% of the poorest census tracts in America. Each state deems which of its census tracts will become opportunity zones. Those were due in April. States have filed. Our state, I can tell you, in Wisconsin, they're already been approved. And so now we're beginning to roll out this concept so that the 25% of the most distressed census tracts are able for opportunity zones. Any investor can take an asset, sell it, invest it in an opportunity zone in a fund, and if they keep it there, meaning not short-term money, if you keep your investment in these distressed communities for at least 10 years, you don't pay capital gains on it. You don't pay taxes on it. And
you talked about that, I remember.
We talk about this forever.
Years ago, it's now law, and I think a lot of people will be surprised that they haven't heard about this in the media, but it's reality, it's happening.
It's reality, it's happening, and so what we're trying to do is promote the concept, right. and we believe there are trillions of dollars of unrealized capital gains that are out there that can be unlocked and reinvested in poor communities. And so now we want to make this concept really take off. We want to get funds designed and built to go invest. The other thing that we did in the tax law is something we call social impact bonds. Right. It's a concept that we got this from Great Britain. It was something that they used. Identify a problem in a distressed community, identify a solution, pre-agree on how you're going to measure the effectiveness of whether it works or not, and then you can sell a bond to finance this plan. And if the metrics are met, the goal is achieved, the bond pays off. And that is another way of getting private capital into the hands of local poverty fighters who have an idea they want to try and fix a problem. And again, it's all about getting private capital into our poor and distressed communities to try and turn things around. The reason we got into these ideas is at the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty, we started scratching our heads and thinking, okay, it's been 50 years. We put trillions of dollars in spending in fighting the war on poverty. We created lots of bureaucracies, lots of programs, and we really basically measured success on effort, on input, on how many programs do we have, how much money are we spending, how many people are on the programs. And we really were looking at it the wrong way, which is, are we truly getting at the root causes of poverty? Are we truly solving things such that we're actually getting people out of poverty, multi-generational poverty, situational poverty? Are we actually fixing the problem and really bending the curve? Because the poverty rates are about the same as they were when we started this thing 50 years ago.
Exactly.
So that's what led to all these ideas. There are many things we're also doing in policy to try and streamline and get resources back to communities and get rid of the top-down, heavy-handed bureaucracy that comes from the federal government, no matter who's in charge of the federal government. And that is a number of the things that we've been doing. We also want to emphasize work and career development, skills. So our prison reform bill is moving its way through. We passed it out of the committee just this last week to focus on skills in prison, focus on reducing recidivism, focus on mainstreaming people coming back into society. And also, we want to focus on work for an able-bodied person. In this kind of an economy where you have more job openings than people looking for jobs right now. And we have a real issue of labor force. We have about 12 million people who can work, who ought to work, who are able-bodied, but are not working or looking for work or in school. So we believe we have an opportunity to pull people off of the sidelines into school or into the workforce so that they can get opportunity. And that is what that is a piece of what we're trying to accomplish here. And we think this economy is the perfect time to do this. So we want to flood the zone with private capital, with fresh ideas, empower local poverty groups. And we also want to make sure that the programs that people do experience are focused on getting them up, not staying where they are, but moving into school or moving into work. And that's basically the components of what we've been trying to achieve. A number of these things are now already in law as of a few months ago, and the rest we hope to get done by the end of the summer.
That's great. That's a great agenda. Come on. That's a great agenda because it focuses on problems, but it also focuses on solutions.
Right.
And it creates policies, it creates resources, and it assumes that there's a connection with people that know how to execute. Now, we talk a lot in private about the fact that there are resources available, and there are people who are really the unsung heroes and heroines of local communities. How do you make that connection between the resources and the right people?
So this is what we've been doing. This is what we've been doing for a few years, which is, let's just take Shirley Holloway over in Anacostia, who's got a great program, or Jubal Garcia with Outcry in the Barrio, or the work you're doing in New Jersey and around the country. There are great ideas. There are people who actually know how to solve problems, but they're under-resourced. That's why what we're trying to do is, number one, just connect people. That's what the Kemp Foundation helps do, is connect people who want to help, who have resources, with those proven poverty fighters in communities who actually know what they're doing. And what we try to do is get the middleman out of the way so that those resources can happen. But again, that's the purpose of opportunity zones. That's the purpose of social impact bonds. That's the purpose of doing all the kind of work we're doing. And the last point I guess I'd make on this policy rollout is a number of years ago, we were having a hard time trying to measure the effectiveness of our efforts to fight poverty. And we really had no way of measuring whether what we were doing was working or not. So we teamed up with a lot of scholars, and Patty Murray and I formed a commission, the Evidence-Based Policy Commission. That commission produced a result on here is how you can go forward and measure the success of these programs as to whether they're effective or not. And here's how you open up data so that scholars and researchers can go and help improve this. That commission bill now is working its way through Congress. It's already passed the House, and we're working on getting it into final law so that we are now measuring the effectiveness of our poverty reducing efforts so that at the end of the day, we go with what works and we stop doing things that don't work, that are failing. And we believe that private sector investors out there are going to be more encouraged to invest in solutions when they can see hard data that this program works. These people who are fighting poverty in these communities are actually doing a good job, so it's worth my investment. tack a social impact bond on top of it, get an empowerment zone, opportunity zone in this area, and we really think we can accelerate revitalizing our communities.
One of the challenges we have is that there's often political and reputational risk in solving problems.
Yeah.
For instance, when you came to New Jersey, we showed you our foster care adoption strategy. Well, over the years, we took in 1,440 foster children and adopted 300. Now, when you adopt 300 children, you're basically saving the state $3.6 million that no longer has to be given to foster families because those children are now in forever families. But then when the government cuts the budget by $3.6 million, the perception is that the government doesn't care because spending has gone down. Well, if you solve a problem, spending can go down, and that money can be redirected somewhere else.
That's right.
How do you, because your philosophy and your policies pursue that kind of strategy, how do you answer the critics that say that solutions and expenditures are tantamount to one another?
Because that's exactly what that's what this commission was all about. That's what our evidence-based policy legislation is all about, which is we have to change the definition of success. The definition of success is not effort. It's not 3.6 million in more funding. It is, did we solve the problem?
Yeah.
Did we get kids and children in better families? Are all the things that come out of a bad foster system solved or not? So by moving the definition of success from input and effort to outcome and results is how I believe you not only get the moral high ground, how you win the argument so that you can focus on truly improving people's lives. And that's, again, the whole concept behind all these efforts, whether it's opportunity zones, social impact bonds, which, by the way, that's a perfect candidate for a social impact bond. We have let's just say we have a problem in this state with this foster care program, or in this city with this foster care program. We have a solution that we think will work. Here's how we're going to measure its effectiveness. You can then have a bond to finance doing this. And if those measurements are actually achieved, those goals are achieved, the bond pays off. And the private capital that went in to finance that activity gets paid off. And if it doesn't get paid off, but then you've learned a lesson of what didn't work.
Exactly.
And that's the whole trial and error concept, but with the goal toward actually achieving the result, which is improving a person's life.
Well, when I leave here, I'm going to call Arizona Governor Doug Ducey.
Yeah.
We're working with him to take 2,000 children that are in group homes and place them in private homes. Will save the state of Arizona $100 million. But we need a bond.
That's right. Yeah. You need a bond, but we want to be able to ahead of time. Ahead of time, we said this is the goal. This is what we're trying to achieve. Don't be surprised, everybody, if we actually end up saving the taxpayers some money that can be used for something else. Don't be surprised. So that's the whole point of this, of shifting this conversation so that it is outcome and results oriented. The problem I have seen in this issue is it becomes partisan, it becomes ideological, it becomes fiefdom. People like the status quo, they're clung to the status quo, their livelihoods are tied to the status quo. All of that is a big distraction away from actually getting people out of poverty, actually solving the problem.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
I'm a Baptist preacher. You've been to the church, you're Catholic, and both of us know Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. But he didn't say the same folk would be poor from generation to generation. Right. So there will always be poverty, but the same people don't have to be in it.
That's right.
I talked about political risk. It is true that in small circles behind closed doors, there is a lot of bipartisan consensus, but few people. I saw Congressman Davis from Chicago come in earlier. I know Hakeem.
Hakeem Jeffries
worked with you from New York. Jack Kemp had a good relationship with Walter Fauntleroy and Floyd Flake. But it seems that the partisan divide is so entrenched that people on both sides would rather have people who need their cooperation lose than to rise above the partisan divide and really work together.
It takes leaders. And again, this is why Patty Murray and I have this bill to say the definition of success should be measured by the outcomes. That way, we check our ideology at the door, we check our partisan guilds at the door, and we focus on here's the goal, and if the goal is being met, then let's go with what works. And if the goal isn't met, then we don't go with what fails, we go with what works. That's why we're trying to change this conversation. But I don't want to get them in trouble. I don't know if I would, but But Danny Davis is
here.
the kind of guy who actually reaches across the aisle to focus on an outcome to get things done. I served with him for years.
Where is he? Where is he?
I
saw
hope
him
I
in the
don't
back.
want to get him in trouble.
There he is.
Danny. So
Let me tell you something. You can't get Danny Davis.
yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble, Danny. So Danny and I, before I was Speaker, I was chair of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that Danny serves on. He is one of those members who says, if this is, you and Diane Black worked on those education bills together. If this is a good idea, I'm for it. And it takes leaders like that who are willing to buck, sort of the partisanship. Hakeem's another good guy who I was just describing. I'm for criminal justice reform and prison reform. Those are two similar issues, but slightly different issues. We now know we have a path to law on prison reform. So we want to get as much done as possible, and we have a pathway into law. And Hakeem is a member of the Judiciary Committee, which for a while there was looking like we weren't going to have any support on an issue most of us agree on.
Yeah.
Let's reform the prison system. Let's focus on anti-recidivism. Let's focus on job training, on skills, and making sure that we can mainstream people when they come out so that they have some opportunities. Hakeem Jeffries teamed up with a guy named Doug Collins, a former pastor from Georgia, a Republican, and they brought this bill through committee, and they got a massive bipartisan vote just this week, and we're going to get this issue done. Right. So it takes some leaders willing to stand up and actually say, I'm for this because it's the right thing to do.
Well, I had to pull up my phone because I agreed to take questions that came through Jimmy, but I realized I didn't have my phone, and I knew Jimmy's going crazy trying to figure out why am I not asking his questions. Okay, so that would segue, the political discussion will segue into the governmental discussion. I was in state government under Governor Whitman and federal government under President Bush, and I've watched over the last 20 years a shift in the culture of government and the temperament of government. Based on your 20 years of experience, and you're now envisioning light at the end of your 20-year tunnel.
Yes, I am.
Describe what you think is the culture of government and the prospects for making for more efficient and effective government.
Yeah, so I'm concerned about some things and very optimistic about other things. What I'm concerned about is just the hyperpolarization that we see. And it's not necessarily one particular person or personality. I think it's the 21st century in that with digital and the internet, it has weaponized polarization.
Wow.
And what we've learned is identity politics, which now is practiced by both sides, the left and the right. Identity politics, which seeks basically to divide people from one another for political gain and for political profit. That has been accelerated with the internet, basically. And so there are forces out there that have been able to take, the moral relativism that's pervasive in society, which is something that pastors and families have to fix, and put identity politics on it and added 21st century technology to a devastating effect. And I think that is one of the reasons why we have so much more polarization. So that means we all have to work even harder to overcome this divisiveness that we have. And that is where I'm actually, I have a sense of optimism, which is because of the fact that we can better measure what works, because the world is so much smaller because of technology, we can actually use real-life evidence of what really works to break through this polarization, to break through this tribalism that's been rising, and just focus on outcomes and results and what works. And where I'm really optimistic is the economy is doing well and going to get even better, I believe. So I believe it's the kind of policies we pursued, regulatory relief and tax reform. It has unlocked hundreds of billions of dollars just this year investing into jobs. I mean, where I live, we've got Foxconn coming to Racine. That's 13,500 jobs. That's coming to just a couple hours north of here. And we've got a new technical college campus that's being built there to train workers to go have really good jobs of the 21st century. So the point I'm trying to make is there's a lot of those opportunities out there. There are 6.6 job openings in America. That's more than people looking for jobs. But we still have a lot of displaced people who are not even counted in the unemployment rate. But we have opportunities that are out there. So in a time where we have the kind of economy we have, where we have an acknowledgement we have to focus on getting people the skills they need to get the careers and the jobs they want. And we have those opportunities out there. I'm optimistic that we can help pull people out of poverty, pull people off the sidelines, get them into work, get them into skills training, work on the soft skills, work on the hard skills, and really make a huge dent in opportunity for the better. And so that's why I'm really actually optimistic, but I think we have more to do to overcome this hyperpolarization that is really sort of pervading our country and our society.
Yeah, in many ways, you are who you are because you had an opportunity to see leadership like Jack Kemp's leadership, which is a lot of
It was
why
inclusive
we're here
leadership. It
today.
was an inclusive, aspirational form of politics.
After the 2012 election, you, Bob, and I had dinner shortly thereafter, and we invited you to spend time in communities where there were problems being solved. Not only did you agree to do it, you agreed to do it without media attention. You are now on your way out. Jack Kemp mentored you. Who are you mentoring? How do we get more Jack Kemp, Paul Ryan type leaders? Because it seems that representatives like yourself, Danny, Hakeem, are far and few between.
Yeah.
So where's the pipeline?
There are
the bench?
I'm actually pretty excited about the bench. There's a pretty good pipeline. I just mentioned Hakeem, who's a Democrat from Danny. Where's he from? Brooklyn, I think.
Brooklyn.
Yeah, Brooklyn. So
Well,
I know
that's
he's
where
one
I'm
of the
from.
boroughs. These boroughs all run together. I'm from Wisconsin, so
That's right.
So I see young leaders who are more outcome-based. I think Cedric Richmond, who's head of the CBC, is one of those leaders. On our side of the aisle, I see a lot of good young leaders. I'm just talking about the House of Representatives,
Right.
but I see a lot of young leaders who are up and coming. We have former pastors who have ministered in poor communities who really have a passion for this. There's a podiatrist, surgeon, military guy, Brad Wenstrup from Ohio, who has a huge heart for this. So I do believe that we have a whole bunch of Kemp-like aspirational, inclusive conservatives who want to be mission-focused and outcome-based focused that are in Congress now who you don't read about them because they're not on Fox News or on CNN, wailing away. They're not trying to get a lot of attention. They're just actually trying to get things done. So there are different kinds of folks in politics. I call them beers and doers. We have a lot of doers on both sides of the aisle, by the way, who really are mission-focused. And that is why, ultimately, I'm optimistic. There is a lot getting done. I mean, Danny would probably agree with me. I would think about 80% of what we pass in Congress is bipartisan. About 8 out of 10 bills that we bring to the floor, he was just telling me about the bills they just got out of Ways and Means Committee, are bipartisan. So know that a lot is getting done under the surface of the media because what gets attention are the controversial stuff. What gets attention are the things where we truly do have big differences and we fight each other over those differences. But underneath that scrum in the media on the internet is actually a lot that is actually getting done. And that's what these workers in Congress, these doers in Congress are focused on. And there's a great bench. It's one of the reasons why I'm comfortable moving on. My kids are 13, 14, 16, doing this for 20 years, got a lot of the things I wanted to get done. And I want to go work, in private life in these areas. But I take solace in the fact that there's a whole crop of young leaders, newer leaders that are ready to take this mantle on.
Well, good. Well, send us their names so we can take solace also. All right. Justin Heath is here. He has a question. How much does education have to do with the future, with future opportunities? Don't we need to address schools from a federal level?
Everything. Yes. So, yes, the answer is yes to that. There are two areas of reform at the federal level we're working on. If you know, K through 12, about 96% of the money is local money. Right. It's property taxes, it's state and local. We passed a bipartisan reform about 2 years ago, redoing Title I to give more power and authority to state and local communities. But now we're working on career and technical education reform. That bill is out of the House. Big bipartisan vote. It was a massive bipartisan vote. And that is to streamline the career and technical education resources and the bureaucracy, get those resources back to our communities so that Gateway's a perfect example where I live, just north. The dollars go to the local, I think you call them city colleges or community colleges in Illinois. We call them technical colleges. Let them team up with local employers to come up with a curriculum to teach people the skills that are needed in those local up-and-coming industries. That kind of flexibility of making sure that people can get the skills they want at a cheaper price for the jobs that are being offered. It's one of the big bills that we're moving through the system. It's out of the House, it's moving through the Senate, and then we're working on higher education reform. The question about higher education reform is, can you break up a monopoly and allow different ideas to flourish? Can you have transparency so that you can get at the root cause of tuition inflation, which is measure the buck you get for $1 tuition based upon what do you get with that dollar? How can you measure, do people get the skills they want, the degrees they want, and do they get the jobs they want, and what do those jobs pay? So bring some transparency to the higher education system so that people can truly see what they're getting for their money and then measure according to results. That is the higher education reform that we're pushing through. So those are two of the things that we're working on right now in the education.
Well, that's critical in higher ed because the trillion-dollar debt burden of student loans often seems to have no value proposition. And so if we can align value with cost, then I think higher ed can be reformed. We have another question here about just the general area of success, results, and outcomes. As we measure success by results and outcomes, would you speak to the time it may take to see results in traumatized youth and/or neighborhoods?
It's a really good question. So I hate to say that everything is based on legislation because it really isn't. But what we have learned from looking at basically 50 years of data on the war on poverty is we don't glean whether or not these programs are effective or not. We now know how to release data in a way to protect people's privacy and to measure based on outcomes. And we have a bill that will open this data up. This is government data, but what we're trying to do is start a whole new cottage industry of results-oriented poverty fighting. Because of technology today, we can use outcome-based data. LEO is a perfect example. The Laboratory for Economic Opportunity at the University of Notre Dame. They are building. Baylor has one of these as well. There are a lot of schools that are doing this. I'm close to the Irish, but to the Notre Dame. So what LEO does is they have developed models on how to go into with poverty-fighting solutions in specific communities to have quality control and to measure success. So LEO is doing this right now. I was at Catholic Charities in Fort Worth not too long ago. Catholic Charities in Fort Worth has wraparound social services with case workers and case management to focus on people's problems to get them out of poverty. And LEO has basically designed a measurement system so that they can measure whether they're being effective or not in tracking a person through, after they've been dealt with, to go with what works. So there are resources already out there and people who know how to help design programs to focus on what works. So that is actually occurring right now. What we're trying to do is just hypercharge that.
Yeah, and not only does that data attract public support, but in my experience, if you do an effective job that can produce measurable outcomes, even the private sector.
That's the point.
Will help you. I mean, Prudential called me on our financial program, and Prudential now is one of our private sector partners because the data reveals success.
Yeah, here's the way I see this. I think for about a generation, we've been telling the rest of our fellow citizens, yes, as you drive, down to the ball game, you go to see the Bears or the Bulls,
Or the Cubs. The Cubs.
You're driving past these poor neighborhoods. I remember driving past Cabrini Green to go, I'm actually a Cubs fan, but
Good.
We go to the White Sox park every now and then. So, remember you drive past these areas and government was telling people, don't worry about this. You don't need to do anything. Just pay your taxes. Government's got this covered. And so, right or wrong, it was well-intended programs. We've basically told citizens, you don't have to do anything about this, but pay your taxes. And so we've marginalized the poor. We've displaced the poor. We have told people you don't have a responsibility. Our faith tells us otherwise. But what I think we can do with this new approach is refuse and reintegrate people in need with people who actually want to help but don't know how to help.
Right.
And that means outcomes. That means evidence. That means here is something that works. We have proven data that shows that this is working. Invest in it. And now we've made the tax laws so that it actually pays to invest in it.
Right.
So that's basically what we're trying to do is reintegrate problem solvers with people with problems, show that we can have measurable results, you can make a difference, and now we want all this private capital to flow, and we want the government to help do that. I always tell people, we don't want to cut government spending in this area. It's not about spending cuts. It's about getting better outcomes.
Right.
And what we want to do is basically measure success based on outcomes, not based on inputs. So government shouldn't be manning the front lines. Government should manage the supply lines, supply the resources, supply the beginnings, but let's have the frontline poverty fighters with proven know-how that's now measurable, actually doing things and making a difference. And then let's get private capital combined as well to focus in harmony. Everybody, government, private sector, prudential, banks, whoever, along with local on-the-ground poverty fighters going with what works. That is what we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah, the reason this is so important is because when the speaker talks about on-the-ground poverty fighters, these are people who often have no credentials, they have no 501c3, they may have one, but they don't have a big social service bureaucracy. And as we've seen the war on poverty over the last 50 years, there are literally bureaucracies built that specialize in accessing resources without having to help people.
Yeah, it's like a poverty industrial complex, as Bob Woodson said.
That's exactly what it is. And so as someone who's been on the ground, at the end of the day, access to capital and the building of capacity is really what will make the difference in these sustainable outcomes.
Violence-free zones is a perfect example. So we've spent a lot of time on violence-free zones. Bob Woodson is the man who promotes these around the country. We have it in Racine. We've got it in Milwaukee. I believe there's some here in Chicago. Pulaski High School is a really good example. Pulaski High School, a handful of years ago, had 13 gangs in Pulaski High School. This is right across the street from St. Luke's, our greatest heart hospital. One of the best heart hospitals in Wisconsin. You don't want to pick. So it's in Milwaukee. It's in a really important part of town. And Pulaski High School had horrible graduation rates, horrible tuition rates, massive amounts of violence. They're putting police and cameras in there. Nothing worked until they came up with the violence-free zones. Now, what are violence-free zones? Mentors in the schools attached to kids who are troubled youth, helping them find their way. And by the way, the mentors aren't, clinically trained, PhD, masters, social scientists. It's people who themselves were in gangs, people who have felonies, people who went through these problems. And, government programs, if you're doing a background check on a person, none of these people would get a job.
Not one.
But these are the folks who actually have the credibility.
Right.
They've redeemed themselves. They want to give back, and they want to tell youth, don't make the mistake I made. And by the way, they have more credibility than anybody. And guess what? Those gangs are gone. Violence is gone. Graduates are up.
That's right.
The metrics are there.
They're there.
So what we do is we go tell this story, go invest in this. Let's create more of these things. Private capital, local school districts. That's the kind of thing we want to flourish. And that means local poverty fighters are typically people that won't make a background check if it's all government. And the United Way might say, ooh, geez, I'm not so sure. That's why we want to focus on what actually works and getting behind the people with credibility to actually solve these problems. And what we think our approach will do is all that matters is results. It doesn't matter who gets us the results as long as we get the results. And now we're trying to make it so that it actually pays to invest in doing this so that we can reintegrate this approach. That's what this philosophy is all about.
And that's a great philosophy. Listen.
Sorry, I get going on this stuff sometimes.
No, you do. You got a little preacher in you, I know. We only have a few minutes left. Here's an important question that I think you'd like to answer. What's the difference between new market tax credits, opportunity zones, and social impact bonds?
Okay, that's a good question. So new market tax credits, which we're also we call them reauthorized. We kept them going.
Right.
New market tax credits, pretty much banks administer them, and they're a tax credit for a specific investment in a specific community to build up some kind of an investment. Typically, a lot of them go to real estate deals or factories. So you can, certain areas can get new market tax credits that banks administer to tax credit finance the building of some kind of a business. And they're very finite. Social impact bonds are, there was one that actually failed in New York City to try and, which is part of a success story in a weird way. There was one that failed in New York City, which was to try and focus on truancy and delinquency, and they had an idea They said this is what measurement will look like. And they didn't meet the measurement, so the bond didn't pay off. But they got private capital that invested in it. Social impact bonds basically say you can create a bond that will pay off, meaning that the tax laws allow the bond to be paid off to fix a problem. It doesn't mean build a building. It might mean drug addiction, homelessness. It could be any kind of problem in a community that you define, here's the problem, here's how I define solution, here's how we'll measure success, and then you float a bond to finance this plan, and if those metrics are met, the bond does pay off. You get private capital to come in, induced by the fact that it's like a municipal bond to create a social good. That's what a social impact bond is. So it's not necessarily a physical building like a new market tax credit. Opportunity zone is basically this entire census tract, this entire neighborhood, this area is now eligible for zero capital gains if you invest in this area.
Right, okay.
So we call these like-kind exchanges. You can sell an asset, roll it into a fund in this area. You keep your investment there for 7 years, you get a big discount. You keep it there for 10 years, you have no taxes on that asset. So 96% of Puerto Rico is an opportunity zone now.
Right.
So if you go, we had a lot of work to do to rebuild Puerto Rico. So if you go and invest in Puerto Rico, you will have tax-free savings on the back end with that investment. So we believe there's about $6 trillion of untapped, unrealized capital gains. We want to tap that to get that investment into these poor communities. And I think new market tax credits will pale in comparison when this is all fully rolled out.
Okay, we're out of time, and I want you to spend the last couple of minutes helping us, because many of us will never see you again like this in person as Speaker of the House other than television. Where is Paul Ryan going after he is Speaker Paul Ryan?
My plan is to come up with a plan in 2019. So I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think I should, because I've got a lot of work to do right now.
But that's an answer.
Yeah. So I'm going to run through the tape. I've got a lot of work to do for the next six to 8 months, and then we'll figure out on after that. But I'm not walking away from this fight. I can guarantee you that.
No, we won't let you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're too young. You're too bright. You're too passionate. You're too accessible. You're in Wisconsin. We can find you.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's give Speaker Paul Ryan a great round. Come on.
Thanks.
Great round of applause.
Appreciate it. All right, buddy.
Great job.
Thanks, brother.
Great job.